Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Factory Must Grow, episode 14. Today we'll be flying solo. There's a little bit of a time crunch for me today, and so it'll be a little bit of a shorter podcast, but I'm excited to get into the recent Factorio Friday facts because we took a week off. We've got two of those to dive into, and I'm pretty excited about that. And then, depending on if we have time or not, there will be another main topic, but I think we've got a lot with the FFFs, so we'll see if we have time to get to that or not. But before we dive into the show, I wanted to thank the show's patrons and supporters. All patrons get a special Discord color in chat, and some of the tiers get access to a special Discord channel, as well as your name in the credits of all of the Krydania videos. And if you'd like to, you can also support the podcast directly. There's a link to that in the About section of the podcast. So, we're going to move on to the mod spotlight, and that for today is going to be composite factories. This is a really interesting one that very few people know about, I think. It was made by Sopel about 3 years ago, and it only has 800 downloads. But this is one of the more unique mods out there in terms of capability. It can do more than most mods can. So what it is it allows for what a lot of people would call black box production of resources or power or what have you. Essentially, you can... Let's take a green circuit build, for example, and let's kind of imagine you make this tileable green circuit build in Factorio where you've got a belt of iron plates and copper plates coming in on the left, and then you've got kind of this square area where you've got a bunch of inserters and belts and assemblers and power poles and all that jazz, and at the end comes out a belt, or, maybe not a full belt, but maybe 10 per second of green circuits. And so you've got this nice tileable green circuit build, and maybe it's got, a few hundred inserters and dozens of assemblers and all that sort of thing. And let's say you want to paste 100 of these. Well, that's going to have a large UPS cost on your base, right? Updates per second. And when you start mega basing these things, it can get really laggy. Well, Composite Factories allows you to take all of that and turn it into one building. Literally one assembler. And you would probably want to use loaders if you're using the Composite Factories mod, but you essentially create a building that does the same thing as an entire chunk of your factory. And it would only, in terms of the game itself, it would only see it as one assembler. It's just one assembler that takes in a bunch of iron plates, a bunch of copper plates, all in the right ratios, and it uses the right amount of power to produce a heck of a lot of green circuits. And it would even, to create this building, you would need to use every single one of the entities as an ingredient. So if you had 200 inserters in the original build, you would use 200 inserters to make this building. Same with all the power poles and the belts and the modules in the beacons and everything else. So how does this work? Well, essentially what you do, it's not simple. And I think the reason it's not downloaded by more people is because there's a catch. And the big catch is that you cannot create these builds in game. You have to essentially create them. There's a tool to help you create them in game, and then you have to paste those. The tool brings up a text box of all of the entities, and it has a couple blanks that you need to fill in yourself, and you have to paste all that into a mod file, a mod prototype file. And once you do that, then you reload the game, and now that factory is available. So it's a little bit of a technical process and a slightly complicated process, but once you've got it down, it's not that bad. So essentially what you would do is you would use Helmod or Factory Planner or YAFC or some other tool. I mean, I guess you could use your brain if they're smaller numbers to figure out what are the exact inputs, what are the exact outputs, what's the exact power consumption. And then you use the selector tool in game that Composite Factories comes with. And you essentially drag a box over the whole section, and it will automatically plug in all the entities that you need as ingredients. It will plug in the size, which is automatically, if you use a rectangle area, it'll make it a square that uses the same amount of tiles total. And, if you want to, you can modify the size to be a little smaller to kind of account for, the fact that you could build a little denser, I don't know. Or you could make it a little bigger because you feel like it's making the game easier. But by default, it just goes to the exact same size. So if you had a 40 by 40 square of assemblers and inserters and all that, the Composite Factory will be a 40 by 40 building. And you have to plug in how many items go into the recipe, how many items come out of the recipe, and what the recipe time is, and what the power draw is. And there might be, oh, pollution. Yeah, you would have to plug in pollution as well. So you have to plug in all those numbers, and it's kind of, you could totally cheat with that, right? You could say 1 iron plate plus 1 copper plate makes 500 circuits. And that is obviously cheating. You can make whatever you want, but like that's how any mod really works that allows you to make new prototypes. You can just make them into whatever you want. The whole point of the mod, though, is to make prototypes that represent real parts of your factory. So, and prototypes, for those who don't know, is just a fancy word for like an assembler or a recipe for an assembler. So that's how the Factorio under the hood essentially works with items, is they're all called prototypes. So you make a prototype for this composite factory, and I believe you need a special building to make the composite factories. It's locked behind a tech tree, but not super far into the tech tree. So it all works pretty nice. And yeah, you can, the bottom line is you can mega base times 100 with this mod. You could make a 400 by 400, composite factory building that takes, 5,000 iron plates and 5,000 copper plates and spits out hundreds and hundreds of final products. And it would have basically no UPS cost at all. So I'm surprised it's not downloaded by more people. I think most of it is a lot of people don't know about it, which is why I wanted to cover it, because it's a really cool mod. It is, like I said, there's a catch. It's technical. You have to make the prototypes yourself, but once you figured out how to do it, it's a pretty quick process. You make the build in Hell mod, so you can get your input numbers per second, your output numbers per second, and the power draw. You make the actual build in game, and then you just drag the square. It'll pop up with all the text you need. And then you just paste in kind of the ingredients and the outputs. And then you open your mod file and you paste that chunk of text into one of the mod files. And you can just paste one underneath the other. It's not like you need to make a new file even. The file's already there for you. You just paste inside of it. And then you're done. You save it, you reload the game, and now you've got this composite factory that you can build. One sad part is it kind of makes the game uglier, right? Because it's just one large building with no animation. It kind of looks like a warehouse. So that's another big downside of it, is your factory won't look as cool. But if your goal really is mega basing, and I think this appeals to a lot of people who also like Factorissimo, because Factorissimo is kind of similar in the sense that stuff is happening that you can't see happening, right? You've got ingredients going in and you've got outputs coming out, and you're not really getting to watch the assemblers assemble or the inserters moving items. So if you already like Factorissimo, it's worth considering composite factories as well, because it does a similar idea. It's actually less cheaty than Factorissimo, because it's not giving you free space like Factorissimo does. It's actually, if you're not modifying it, at least, it's using the same amount of space that your real factory would. So all that to say, check out composite factories. It's pretty cool. I really wanted to use it in my Pyanodons run. I just never got far enough for it. I think it would be very applicable in a Pyanodons run, because you need large amounts of things. And sometimes, at least with Pyanodons, there's a lot of spaces where you can make stuff from nothing. Like you can just use water to make sand and soil. And so you could make a huge build that generates 100 sand per second from just power. And this would be a really good time to use a composite factory, because then you could just plop down the composite factory and get your sand wherever you need it. It's also a little, in game, you'd probably want to have logistic spots, so you could create a requester chest to get all the various ingredients you need to make a composite factory, because it's, like I said, it's going to require every entity. So we're talking hundreds of belts, tons of inserters, tons of power poles, beacons and modules if those are in there. So it would require a lot of pieces to make these, but once you have it, it's the whole build just ready to go. And you can even just pick it up and move it somewhere else really easy, which is a little bit harder. Even if you have construction bots, you got to Control X and Control V, and it's all got to fit right. This is just one nice big building. And if you're interested in seeing a little bit more of it, I actually did a mod spotlight for the mod on my Krydania channel. So if you just Google Composite Factories mod spotlight, that should pop up, and you can kind of watch me cover some of the functionalities. I can't remember if Sopal updated it with the drag functionality before or after I did the video, because it's been a long time. So if you don't see me talk about dragging the box to select entities, know that it exists now. It's been updated since then. So there's your mod spotlight. I think it's one that more people should know about or try out. I think it's really cool if you're wanting to make 1 million SPM in vanilla Factorio. And we'll talk about where I'm getting that 1 million number. You probably could with composite factories. As it is right now, I don't think it's really possible because of UPS issues. But if you used composite factories heavily, I think you could potentially do 1 million SPM. And now I'm sitting here wondering, would that amount of trains still be too much for the game to handle? Maybe not. I don't know. That would be a challenge that someone could take on. Anyway, I'm going to move on. So there have been 2 Factorio Friday facts, both of which have been pretty big ones. One of them very big. I'd say it's on the order of the quality update. Fluids 2.0. So this was Factorio Friday facts 416. And they have finally changed the fluid system. We've been wondering if it's going to happen for a long time, and it's finally happening. It's coming with Space Age. They are moving to a whole new fluid system. And I have a lot of thoughts on it, but first let's kind of go over what it is. So, well, let's talk about the old system first, because they start with talking about how the old system wasn't really going to work anymore. So the old system, it works in a fairly intuitive way. You put fluids in a pipe, and they kind of flow from that point to the rest of the pipe system. So they'll flow in all the directions, and the further you go, the lower the flow rate goes, which kind of makes sense. That's somewhat realistic. And there's a maximum throughput on the pipes. You can only get so much through each pipe each second. The problem is you don't know how much. So the cons to the old system is that because it's simulating this flow, it's all kind of these complicated numbers under the hood, and there's no easy way to communicate to the player, oh, if you connect this area of your base to this area of your base for a petroleum pipe, you could get at most, 897 petroleum per second. There's no easy way to communicate that to the player because that number isn't it isn't set in the game. It's derived. It's derived from the way that the fluids actually flow. So it's an experimental number. It's not like a set number. And basically, if you want to know what those numbers are, you have to Google it. And that's not a good system, right? If your players have to Google and find this table on a wiki for what the flow rate is for your fluids through pipes, that's not a great system. And they even mention that like, you shouldn't have to Google this. And they didn't like that. And we didn't like that either as players. So let's be honest, that was not great. Another really big downside to the old system is the build order mattered, which there were some really janky mechanics. If you were really min-maxing and you needed every little bit of fluid from a certain, pipe segment or whatever, and you were really trying to get those exact numbers right, then you could run into issues where if you built pipes from left to right, it would do something different than from right to left. Or if you built one part of a junction before another part of a junction, it would operate differently than if you had done it in the reverse. So it was a really janky system under the hood. You didn't run into that particular issue most of the time because most of the time you would just know I can get about 1,000 per second through this pipe, so I'll only utilize about 800 per second or 900 per second, and you'd always be fine if that's how you were doing it. So, it was a little bit of a janky system, but I thought it was cool. I liked that fluids flowed from one end to another. I actually really liked that there was a maximum flow rate. I thought that was good. Just like with belts and trains, there's a maximum. You can't just push an infinite amount through this. So all that to say, on to the FFF. They mention how much this has frustrated them over the course of the years. They said there's been many attempts to rewrite it, but they all ended in failure for one reason or another. The existing algorithm was okay, but as they developed Space Age, the existing algorithm didn't work anymore because of all the legendary modules and legendary buildings and legendary beacons and legendary speed modules. You could make fluids so fast that the old system just didn't work. So they tried, maybe, do we make the pipes hold more fluids and then the flow rate can be faster? Well, then that created a new problem that the buffers were massive. So if you imagine you had 100 pipes in a row, right now that can already hold 10,000 fluids because each one can hold 100. Well, imagine if they had buffed that up to 500 or something. Well, now you've got 50,000 fluids just in your pipes, and like tanks then are kind of useless because you already have storage. And then if you only have a small amount of throughput you need, but you're going a long distance, like to your flamethrower turrets, well, now you're just buffering potentially hundreds of thousands of oil for a situation that only needs a few oil per second on average, and that just doesn't really make sense. So all this to say that they figured this isn't going to work anymore. So what they did, they said our setting proposed an algorithm very close to one he had played with several times, an algorithm from the Minecraft mod Thermal Expansion. And this is essentially a system that merges all of the connected pieces. Almost, it's like an electric network, and I'm going to keep saying that. They even say it in the FFF. They mention electric network type solution, and it really does operate like an electric network. If you have all these connected pipes, it's just one thing. It's one group. We'll call it Group A. You know, if you're putting petroleum into Group A, then anywhere in Group A you can consume petroleum, and it will just consume from Group A's petroleum. It doesn't actually flow. There's no flow from left to right or right to left. If you put it in the left side, Group A has petroleum. If you put it in the right side, Group A has petroleum. And if you take from the left and take from the right, but you're only putting into the left, it won't really matter. The consumers will receive fairly equal amounts of petroleum. And so there's no flow anymore. There's no simulation. It is simply, I have a connected set of pipes and tanks, and therefore I have a grouping, I have a network of pipes, and everything just goes to and from everything in that segment. Pumps are still used in a similar fashion to like separate segments, you know, if you want stuff to go from one segment to another, but not back, then you can use a pump to make it one directional. You can, you know, use pumps and tanks still to kind of prioritize things in the same ways that you used to. But the problem is that now there's no flow, and so things move instantly. You could create something and then have, as far as I understand it, I don't know if they said there was a maximum. So as far as I understand it, you could have 500 underground pipes connected to however far away that would be, a kilometer or two. And you could just use that immediately. There's no time needed for it to flow. There's no pumps needed along the way for it to flow. It's just one big segment. So obviously this is no longer a realistic flow. And they say that in the FFF, fluid pushed to a segment will be immediately available to any point along a segment. The result is that pipes, quote, just work, and you almost never have to worry about throughput. The bullet points they have here, flow is instant, junctions don't matter, and when your input's starved, aka you're using all your petroleum, then the consumer machines get a better split, whereas before usually one machine would get like all the petroleum. Now kind of everybody gets a little bit. So they give examples. You need to go check out the FFF and read it in full, but they give some examples of like how train stops are simpler, how oil processing looks simpler. They've got GIFs and stuff. And they talk about fun over realism. And they say that, you know, essentially the new system is more fun because it works the way you expect it to, and you don't have to Google these weird flow rates and et cetera, et cetera. And the realism of the old system, while there was a niceness to the real flow, there were a lot of downsides, and those downsides were just too large. So now we'll go to Krydex's thoughts. I think it's a step backwards. We know it's a step backwards in terms of realism. They admit that and own that. But as a game designer, you have to make trade-offs, right? Like if your game, to some level, this is a game all about logistics. I mean, that's one of the primary parts of a factory game, as we've discussed in other episodes. Logistics are a huge part of the game. And this new system, while yes, it does fix some of the issues of the old system, it removes logistics. Pipes are no longer a logistical challenge in terms of the fluid itself. Yes, you still have to move a fluid from point A to point B, but there's no worries about flow rate. There's no worries about, you know, like fluid actually moving. It's just like when you put an item on a belt. If you have buildings that are grabbing items off that belt, if you're input starved, if you're only putting one iron plate on the belt every 5 seconds, then the first building is going to get all of those iron plates, right? So that's how belts work. And so now, and that's how pipes used to work, sort of, though junctions made that weird because sometimes you would end up getting fluids to a building further down the line first. So like that, in that sense, it was janky, but it did work in that realistic way that like, yeah, the first thing to grab it gets it. That's just how it works because the fluid got there first. I do think the new system is a little bit too abstract for me. When I read that FFF, I was kind of sad. With most FFFs, I've read them and I've thought, oh my gosh, this is what we always needed. This is what we always wanted. It's better in every way. But with this FFF, I do feel like it's a sideways step. It's like, yes, we fixed some of the problems. Now players aren't going to have to Google how much fluid they can stuff through a pipe. And the amount that can get stuffed through the pipe isn't this weird continuous variable that's changing based on every single segment they place. I actually did like that there was a maximum flow rate, and I also liked that the flow rate decreased as you had longer pipes and that you needed pumps to kind of refresh the flow rate. That felt realistic. Maybe I don't know how real life works, but my understanding of real pipes is that friction is real, even in real life. And so even if you have a long pipe, like, yes, you don't need a pump every 5 seconds, but you do need every once in a while some amount of flow. Or the pump at the start needs to be stronger, maybe, to overcome all of that friction along the pipe. So all this to say, the new system is arguably more boring in a good way and a bad way, I think is my summary. Like, it's more boring. It just, you put fluids into a set of pipes and it just works. And so now it's far more focused on moving fluids with trains from one location of your base to another, or one planet to another with barrels maybe. But there's far less of a logistical challenge of stuff within your base. Now you can pretty much connect every petroleum consumer in your entire base with one pipe network, and theoretically that just works fine. I don't know if I like that. I'll actually say I don't like that. I do know that I don't like that on first blush. Playing with it might be more fun than I think, and I might get bothered less than I think. Change is hard, right? And so some of this is always a little bit of me being an old man shaking my fist at the clouds saying, how dare you change this thing? But in this case, I do think there are some very real downsides to the new system, and we're losing some of the upsides that the old system had. Not to mention just the cool factor. The old system was cool because fluids actually flowed from one end of the pipe to the other. That was cool. They no longer do that. Now you put fluids in and the whole pipe just fills up together like it's one giant swimming pool or something. So yeah, that's about all I have to say about that. I don't love the new system. I think it was necessary because of all the things that they said, and something had to change. I do agree with that. I'm going to go on a slight side tangent here and talk about grief, loss, and change. As the internet does not do this very well. People get into hot debates all the time when things change about a game. Maybe a patch came out that nerfed something that needed to be nerfed, or maybe removed. Maybe a game's in early access and a feature got removed that was planned and people are mad about it. And then there's a bunch of other people going, well, what do you think they should have done? Nothing? And it's like, no, nobody's saying that. You can still be frustrated that a change happened without having a better solution, right? I'm not the game dev here. I'm the consumer. And so as a consumer, I don't like that some of the features that I liked about fluids are now gone. The idea of flowing, the idea of maximum flow rate, the idea of needing to refresh the flow rate. I liked those mechanics. They were obtuse and the numbers were hidden. I didn't like that. But I liked the mechanics at the core, and now they're gone, and that makes me sad. And a lot of people would argue, well, what were they supposed to do? Not change it? No, that's not what I'm saying. I do think they needed to change it, but I'm still sad that they changed it in this way, and that there are now things that are missing. When I've talked about this topic before, and this applies to broader life, not just factory games. It's a little bit like the concept of amputation, right? I was watching a show recently where it was set in the older times and a guy's leg had been injured and it's like, we got to amputate. He's like, I don't want this. And it's like, well, we're going to do this because otherwise you're going to die. And of course, right, like as the guy who had his leg amputated, like there might be moments where he's like, I would rather be dead, but most of the time he's probably going to be grateful. Like, yes, I'm grateful that happened. I'm glad I'm alive. This is better than being dead, of course, but I'm still sad I lost my leg, right? Like there's still this sense of loss, even though, yes, the new thing is arguably better than what the old thing would have led to. There's still loss. And I think that argument really applies with changes in games. And I see a lot of people making this fallacy that like, well, just because the old system was leading towards death, and they had to change it, you're not allowed to grieve about the loss of the old system or the loss of things that were good about it. And I think that's silly. Like there needs to be room to be frustrated about these changes, even though the new thing is fixing things that had to be changed. So all that to say, that's kind of my bigger life lesson for all of you. Make sure you leave room for people to grieve changes because that's very real. But at the same time, yes, it did need a change. The old system wasn't going to work for Space Age. It just didn't work. The fluid rates were too high and there wasn't a solution that they could find that managed to keep all of the positives of the old system and fix the issues. So they went with something that then, they had to amputate, so to speak. They went backwards. They went to a more basic solution, a simpler solution, a less real solution. And now it works, but we've lost something. And that makes me sad. So those are my thoughts. I'm curious what your thoughts are. Please leave them in the comments on the YouTube episode if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're in Discord, which I highly recommend you join the Krydania Discord. We have a lot of fun. Let me know what you think, because I'm curious to hear other thoughts. It's hard to have these conversations on Reddit because often there's just a downvote brigade when you say something even slightly negative, which is kind of where my rant comes from a little bit too. Like, people on the internet don't tend to be good at letting nuance exist, and this is a nuanced thing, right? There are good things about it, there are bad things about it. It's okay if people are somewhere in the middle. Maybe they're apprehensive to think the new system will be better. Like, that's all okay. So let's have a good conversation. Let's respect other people's opinions on whether they like it or not. Obviously, some people love the new system and they're like, this is all I ever wanted, and they're totally allowed to feel that way. But there's also people like me that are like, I actually don't even know if I like the new system, and I understand why it's necessary, but I don't really like the fact that we have to do this. I wish there was another solution. I don't think this was the best solution. That's how I feel. And I'm allowed to feel that way too. So I'm curious how you guys feel and what your thoughts are. And, if you think I'm being an old man shaking my fist at the clouds, that's okay. You can say that politely. You can say, Krydex, I actually think you're going to like this more than you think you will. And I think once you get into it, you'll find that it's better than you think. Like, you can believe that and you can say that. That's fine. Maybe that's even true. But all that to say, the new system is definitely different. So we have a whole new fluid system coming, and that is exciting at the least, in the sense that new things are exciting, and it'll be interesting to play with it. I am kind of relieved that I won't have to deal with flow rates. Like, it is kind of nice that you can just connect all your petroleum consumers and it just works. Like, it will be easier. So there's a little bit of me that's like, oh, nice. That's one less problem that I have to think about. But then there's that part of me that's like, yeah, but was it a good problem to think about? Was it the kind of thing that made the game better and now it's gone? And that will subsequently sort of make the game worse because they lost a good thing. I don't know. We'll see. Someone on Twitch chat right now is talking about they're not sure if there was a better solution, and I don't know about that. You can't know what doesn't exist, or what hasn't been discovered yet is a better way to say that. There might be a better solution that they couldn't find, and you cannot prove that there's not a better solution. This isn't some math formula here. It's very understandably what am I trying to say? It's obvious that a good solution was hard to find, and it's obvious that they looked for other solutions that still kept fluids flowing properly. But But yeah, no, I would say that it's still completely okay to say there is a better solution to this, because it's true. The better solution would be keep all the good stuff and make it work in the exact way that you want it to work. Now, then that solution has downsides too, but there's always these combinations of upsides and downsides. And who's to say that there's not a solution out there that maintains all the positives while still not affecting UPS? That solution could exist. And I would argue that as a consumer, me wanting a better solution is completely acceptable, even if I'm not the one solving the problem. Right? Like, it's not my job. I'm not the one making the game. I'm allowed to say, this is not a good solution. I want a better one. I'm allowed to say that. I'm allowed to be frustrated that the solution they came up with is not good enough for me. I'm allowed to feel that way. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing, like, I'm allowed to just be there. Now, if I'm just malding all the time and I'm mad about it, that's not any good for anybody. But having a real discussion of, I don't believe this solution is good enough for the quality of the game they're trying to make. I think that stepping back on the realism and turning fluids into a swimming pool is not a good solution. And I do believe there's a better solution out there. I don't know if it's possible for them to implement it in the engine they have. I don't know if it's possible for them to find it. But I think it's silly to say that there isn't a better solution out there and just presume that the one they came up with is the best one. That would be a little too confident on the other side. Like, there might not be a better solution, but I believe there is, because I don't really presume that the one that they landed on is the best possible solution, right? Like, surely there's something better out there, and they didn't have the time or energy or manpower or resources or coding time to get there, right? If they had 5 more years and 50 more programmers, I bet they could find a better solution. So I don't think it's presumptuous for me to say there is a better solution. I'm not saying that I'm mad, like, at them personally because they didn't do the better solution. Like, they had to do what they had to do. They had to say, we only have 3 months to figure this out, and we're going to do the best thing we can do within that time, because we got to start coding it before we can start testing it, before we, whatever. Like, I understand that there are requirements that they have to follow. But again, that's not my problem. I'm the consumer. That's their problem as the developer. As the consumer, I can say, I believe there is a better solution out there that maintained more of the positives and fixed some of the negatives. I don't know exactly what that is, because it's not my job to figure it out. But I do believe that there is a better solution out there, and that, like, I want that better solution. And again, I think that's completely acceptable for me to be there, as long as I'm not using that as ammunition to, like, flame the devs or say that they've done a bad job. Because I would argue that I can complain and still believe they've done the best job possible, right? If they had 3 more years to develop Space Age, I think they would have come up with a better solution. But they didn't have 3 more years, and they're not going to take 3 more years. And I don't want to wait 3 more years for Space Age. So, like, there's this tension, right? Like, I can believe that they could have done a better job given the right circumstances of having more time, more money, more people, et cetera, et cetera. But, like, that's not going to happen. It didn't happen. And I understand that. I can understand the restrictions of reality, while also grieving the losses of reality. Those two things can coexist in tension, and people don't like tension, so they're always trying to convince you it's all one or all the other. But they can coexist. The restrictions of reality do not prevent you from grieving that reality. Like, they can happen at the same time, and let's let people feel those feels and be where they need to be. It's okay that I don't have all the solutions as a consumer. I can still be sad that the solution isn't what I want it to be, and that I think there are better solutions out there. And, of course, there's always the off chance that I'm crazy. There is no possible better solution, but I think there is. Like, I can't promise there is, but I believe there is a version of this game where fluids retain all the awesomeness that they had, all of the game design challenges that they had, without any of the negatives of the UPS, right? Like, I believe that solution exists. I don't know how to find it, and they couldn't find it, but I believe it's out there, right? Like, I don't think I think it's too presumptuous to believe that they did a perfect job. And I would argue that they would agree with that based on the vibe that comes through in their Factorio Friday Facts. They know that they're not a perfect dev team either. They're doing the best they can with the time that they have, the people they have, and the money they have, but that's still not a perfect job. And they know that, and we all know that, and that's okay. So all this to say, I'm not super happy about the new fluids, and I do feel a little bit in the minority. I was looking around on Reddit. Reddit's generally pretty positive when it comes to Factorio, so there might be more like me. They're just not talking because they often get downvoted when they talk about something slightly negative. So yeah, I wanted to kind of hit on that from a more human perspective of like, it's okay for people to have negative feelings about these things. It's not okay for me to flame or just be unnecessarily negative, but I can be frustrated. And that doesn't mean I'm frustrated at Rygaard, who made the post, or at Wooba, who's making these decisions. I'm not frustrated at any of them. I think they're great devs. I think they're doing a great job. And I actually believe that the decision they made for fluids was the right one. Like, I don't think they could have made a better decision. So hear that tension. I don't believe the dev team could have made a better decision. And I believe there's a better solution out there. I can make those two statements together. And again, they live in tension, and that's okay. So anyway, that's my long rant. Thanks for coming to to the Factory Must Grow, where in this episode we talk about how our human mind must grow and our emotional capacity must grow, because those are important parts of the factory that is our human body, because we need to be kind to each other, and I think being kind to each other, a big part of that is creating a good space where feelings can be felt, thoughts can be shared, and things can live in tension. It's not all black and white. People can be positive and negative at the same time. They can be positive about certain aspects of something and negative about other aspects of the same thing. Like that's all okay. We can let people be who they are. Most of the time, people saying negative things are not flaming. They don't need to be shut down. I feel like I'm continuing the rant. People like to shut down negativity real quick on the internet. And I don't know why, because often that negativity is not toxic. Toxic negativity is Wooba sucks, this sucks, how dare they don't know how to make a game, these devs don't know what they're doing. That is toxic negativity that should be shut down. Someone saying, I don't know why Wooba went this direction, it doesn't really make sense to me, I don't think it's making the game a better game. That's completely appropriate and acceptable feedback. Now, you may not agree with it, which is fine, but like that person doesn't need to be shut down for saying what they said. That is a very valid way for them to think and feel. And, they're not saying anything that's even possible to disagree with. They don't like the solution. They think there's a better one out there. Like, there's nothing that you can even shut them down on other than how dare you be negative, which is silly, because negativity is an important part of life. Like, we need the positive and the negative, because if we never have the negative, then we're all just a bunch of yes men, right? And I don't think it's healthy for a game developer to have their entire audience be yes men. You need people who complain about things healthily, right? If no one's complaining, that's probably an issue, because, well, it's just not. If no one's complaining, then that means people don't feel safe to complain, because there's always issues with your game, right? There's always things that aren't as good as they could be. So if no one's saying any of those things, I think that's actually a bigger problem. And I think actually creating a world where people feel safe to voice these negative thoughts, again, in a non-toxic way. We need to teach each other to not be toxic about our negativity, but we need a world where we're safe to voice negative thoughts, and they're actually encouraged. And that is a way that we can all grow together. Again, there's broader topics of like, should we be negative or more positive on average as humans? That's a different sort of thing than what I'm talking about. I do think we all need to be positive people in general, but like constructive negative feedback is still a very important part, especially of a development process for something like this. But yeah, don't hurt people's feelings in the process. Don't be toxic about it. But, if you have something negative to say, that's okay. If it's part of producing a better product in the end, and you as the consumer for sure have that right to voice that negative thought. That that's kind of the whole idea of like, they're making something, we're consuming it, and we're allowed to like it or not. That's why Steam reviews exist. That's why, the star rating exists when you buy items online. Like if it's a 1-star product, other people are going to say, well, clearly people think negatively about this. Maybe I don't want to get it. Right. And so there's this idea that like we all accept these negative thoughts when it comes to reviews, but when people actually voice them, somehow we feel the need to shut them down. So I'll stop ranting. I'm going to move on to the next FFF now. Please do let me know what you guys think about fluids. I do like having this conversation, and I think it's really interesting because I don't know what the better solution is. Anything that I can personally imagine is one that would be more computationally expensive and would cause UPS issues in a base. So like I can't come up with a better solution, but I'm also not a dev who has years to do it. So like I probably never will come up with a better solution, but I am curious if you guys have ideas for what could have been a better solution, or if you guys don't think a better solution is needed in the first place and you're like, no, this is great, we don't need anything better. Please let me know. I'd like to talk about it. So moving on to the next FFF, there is kind of a long post about the process. It's really fun. It's called Space Age Development. And if you haven't been reading the FFFs weekly, I would suggest checking this one out because it kind of goes over the last 4 years and it kind of talks through all their milestones. And that's really fun. So I've already gone a little longer than I planned on because, ranting about fluids and then ranting about human nature is just what I like to do. So now we're going to talk about this FFF, and I think we'll wrap up after that. The other main topic, which I will keep in my back pocket, is some of my favorite games from the last year. And many of them are games that I think y'all as the audience might enjoy as well, even though they're not directly factory games. So that's kind of my other back pocket topic for another day. But FFF 417, Space Age Development, I suggest you go check it out. It's a story over the years, but I'll kind of walk you through the big parts and some of the things that they haven't said before, which were fun. Back in 2021 is when they started, and Kovarex mentions creating the skeleton of the game, and they focused on hiring first. They doubled the team to almost 30 people, with graphics department expanding from 2 to 8 people, which is quadrupling. And then the first thing they wanted to do was what they called a vertical slice, which is kind of like the most bare bones way of playing through the whole expansion. So rather than like, oh, let's figure out the first planet and work that until we've figured it out, they instead said, let's figure out even maybe just conceptually what the first planet is. Okay, lava planet. And then the next planet. Okay, swamp planet. Okay, next planet. And then they just figured out these bare bones ideas. And then they started to build on that scaffold. And he mentions retroactively, this was a very good idea. And I agree that this seems like a really good development idea because you're going to find more of the issues as you go. And kind of their goal was like, let's get a playable product together as quickly as possible. Even if it's missing a lot of graphics, even if it's missing all of the balance, even if it's missing some of the new mechanics, we just want to get as much towards the end as we can, kind of the thinnest possible playthrough. And then we'll expand on that as we go. So by 2022, they already had the first playable prototype. At that, they had already created space platforms. Obviously, they had created the planets. They had created elevated rails. They had created spoilables. And other than that, I think pretty much everything else was bare bones. I am surprised they made spoilables that long ago. I guess it makes sense because that's the core mechanic of the planet. But man, it's just such a unique mechanic for factory gaming. And it's been around in the Factorio world since 2021, behind closed doors. So yeah, in 2022, Kovarex was able to start his first playthrough from start to finish. He says the playthrough is happening over the span of 7 months, and it was nowhere near possible to actually play from start to finish. But the idea was to push through and fill in the gaps. I don't know if he was cheating in items or just kind of ignoring certain parts of the game, but just trying it all out. And they figured out space logistics there. As he was playing through, he found a lot of problems, one of which that I want to touch on game design wise is the landing pads. There's a picture there with on old Glebe, and the it's funny, like the graphics are so obviously like stand-in sprites for the swampy things, and it just looks really funny. But the screenshot has a bunch of landing pads, and each landing pad has like one provider that an inserter is inserting into. And so what he says is it was really annoying to manage each of the item requests individually. So because each landing pad could accept only some cargo from space. I don't know if that meant only one item type or only a certain number of items or what. And then he said, since the landing pads were not logistic providers yet, we had this repeated pattern of landing pad going to passive provider chest. And then here's the big one. Since you could build landing pads anywhere, it felt a bit too cheesy to be able to drop items from space anywhere needed. This is one of the reasons why now we just have one expandable landing pad per planet. And I think that's really cool. That one line there is talking about how this design decision completely changes the game. Right? Because now you have one landing pad on the planet, and that's going to be your hub. Everything from space comes there, and you have to then figure out trains and bots and belts and sorting and all of that to get it where you need it to go, rather than this completely disjointed idea of I can just plop a landing pad wherever I want for whichever item type I want. And that's such a different challenge, right? Like it's almost a different game that you're playing at that point, because the one where you can place a bunch of landing pads, it's kind of just like a logistics chest all over again. As long as you have the items you want in space, well, you can just place one of these landing pads and it operates like a logistics pad. And so the fact that you're kind of constrained to saying, no, this is where stuff from space comes down. It's almost like my space elevator, so to speak. And you have to work around that spot. I think that's really cool. I like that decision a lot. I think it's going to make much more interesting bases. I think it's going to make more interesting challenges, and I think it's less annoying, to be honest, because like he said, like it was kind of annoying to just always have to place a landing pad. And so you ended up, yeah, I think in some ways it was one of those like the best way to play wasn't the funnest way to play, or maybe most optimal way to play wasn't the funnest. And so the new system, I think, allows for more fun and a system that is quote unquote less optimal than being able to place landing platforms everywhere, but more fun. So I'm really excited that they made that decision, and it just is a good example of Wooba having a really good head on their shoulders about what's a wise gameplay decision. I think this is really going to make the game better to just have the one landing pad. And I don't know if they'd spoiled that before. If they had, I'd forgotten about it. I mean, they've talked about a lot of things in FFFs. So when I read it in this post, I was like, oh, that's so cool. I didn't know they were doing that. And maybe that's just because I forgot. But I'm really glad they're doing it that way. All that to say. Then they go on to talk about kind of the conclusion of the first playthrough. And Kovarex said it took 370 hours to clear, which is way too much. It was too repetitive. And some of the mechanics were clunky and annoying to use when you were scaling them up. And then you just had to do too much, like too many items. The scale was too big. So they figured out, okay, we need the game to feel faster. We need to lower the cost, reduce unnecessary recipe steps, increase quality of life, and the planets need to feel more distinct. And that's when they changed Fulgora to go from 12 plants to 2 plants, or sorry, Gleba from 12 plants to 2 plants. Fulgora changed from mining ores in the ground to the scrap mining concept, which I still think that might be my favorite of the new concepts. It's so cool. We'll see. It might be annoying, but I think it's really cool. And then they also, figured out like, okay, let's get basic resources from lava instead of having to do copper, iron, and stone mining. So they were able to kind of twist these other planet mechanics to simultaneously remove repetition and add uniqueness in one step, right? It's like instead of getting copper, iron, and stone from the ground, which would be repeating something, you're now going to do a whole new mechanic, which is scrap mining and recycling that scrap to get your basic resources. So you're doing 2 birds with 1 stone there. And so to meet the same requirement for your factory, which is I need iron plates, you're now doing something new and fun and exciting instead of old and boring and the same as what you did on Nauvis. So really cool, really good decisions. Again, I think they know what they're doing. And then, yeah, 2023, they called the grind. Played the game again from start to finish. Took 240 hours, which is still way too much, but I was quite heavy with the factory size, trying to get almost everything in legendary quality with the goal of 1 million science per minute, which is where I got the 1 million number earlier. He said, I still haven't reached 1 million science per minute yet, but I might get there before we release, which is just crazy that that's even possibly attainable in Space Age. Someone mentioned in Twitch chat earlier that we have already reached 1 million in vanilla if you count the I forgot the name of it. Cluster-torio or whatever, which was essentially a bunch of separate instances of Factorio running where you could transfer items from one instance to another. And because of that, plus tons of people in multiplayer, they were able to get to 1 million. But I don't really count that because, for one, multiplayer feels a little different and you're kind of removing the possible UPS constraints at that point. So like it counts as 1 million, but it's very different than like the composite factories potentially getting one person on one base to 1 million, or what Space Age can let us do, which also sounds like one person and one base can be 1 million science per minute because of the glory of legendary modules. But yeah, they mention they worked on the first iteration of the Gleba enemy, which is pretty exciting. Or is it Gleba? I still don't know. And they say to be shown later. So they're teasing in the teaser that they're going to tease something they haven't teased yet, which is fun. And they talk about graphics coming together. You know, then they go to the fourth year, 2024, things coming together. They talk about having a LAN party and how they're trying to get stuff coming together. And they beat the game in 4 days in an inter-office LAN party. But by the end, not everyone had 60 UPS. And so one of the things they say is like, right now, our goal is to just keep improving the game. The third iteration is happening right now. The main focus is on the vast amount of feedback we got from the LAN party. And it's going to be focused on 2 main categories: bugs, quality of life features, and balancing. That's category 1. And then category 2 is optimizations. The factory just gets bigger in Space Age, and we need to make some programmer magic to make it smooth. So that's pretty exciting. We all love optimizations here in the Factory Must Grow, and they're just, I'm so excited for Space Age. It's going to be dope. And then the last sentence of this FFF is maybe the most exciting sentence. Since things are getting stable, and I'm starting to be pretty happy with the state of the game now, we are ready to give a specific date of the Space Age release, which we will tell you next week. So, yep, you heard it. In just a week, we're going to know the release date of Space Age, which is pretty exciting. And related, the Coffee Stain Studios, the makers of Satisfactory, released a video saying that they are soon going to announce the release date, or at least implying. He didn't say it outright. I almost called him Jace. It's Snut. But Snut said that there will be news very soon. He said, I can't tell you the release date today, but there will be news very soon. So he was kind of saying a very similar thing. So it sounds like maybe by the end of next week, we'll know the release date of both games. And fingers crossed, they're not right next to each other, because otherwise I'm going to have to pick, and I don't want to have to pick. So someone in Twitch chat, Alor, just said, I wonder if they're playing chicken with release dates. And I'm curious too, because these games are probably the closest. I mean, I know that we talk about the big 3 with Dyson Sphere program being in there, but I kind of count Factorio and Satisfactory at least half a step above Dyson Sphere program. Even if they're not bigger in terms of sales, they're bigger in terms of the English-speaking market, definitely, because I know a large amount of Dyson Sphere program is the Chinese market, which isn't a bad thing or wrong thing, but it makes them feel slightly different, and the game's levels of polish is slightly different. Dyson Sphere program doesn't feel polished to the same level. Not to say it's a worse game, but it just, in my head, it's kind of like a half step lower than the big 2, which is Satisfactory and Factorio. These feel like the kings to me, and maybe Dyson Sphere program is the queen. Which why am I queen is lower? I mean, in cards that's true, but we should fix sexism. Anyway, all this to say, I wonder if And what Aylor is wondering is like, is one of the games waiting for the other one to say when they're announcing so they can say, okay, we'll be a month before that or we'll be a month after that. So they're trying not to release around the same time. I would guess with how publishing works, that's not true. Most times, at least with things, Satisfactory's been a little more transparent about their like publishing side of the game. Wooba talks a lot about their game development, but they don't talk a ton about like the business side of their stuff, whereas Satisfactory does talk quite a bit more about the business side of things. And usually most of their decisions are kind of made for like very pragmatic reasons, like, well, that's when our publisher said was the best time to do it, or that's when we needed to do it, or legally with the Epic Store we needed to do it here, and that's why we did it. Like, what I'm referring to there is they're making a price change and they have to do the price change before 1.0 releases. And it's like, you know, I'm sure there's a world where they could have waited even longer, but it might have been like even further down the road. So I don't know. I think they're both pretty pragmatic in how they make these decisions. So I don't think they're going to let each other's release dates impact their own, but it is possible. I wouldn't put it out of the question. And even if they're not going to let it affect their release dates, you know that they all care, right? Like the devs are sitting there, you know, crossing their fingers that they don't end up releasing the game at the same time too, I'm guessing. Because both like competition's good, both games are good for the other game, but if they release on the same day, that's less good for everybody, because then there is this like, even if they're not competing with each other directly, people are only going to have time to play one of those at a time. I do think, though, in this case, the games are so good and the fan base is so dedicated, I think both games will end up getting played by the same people, regardless of which one releases first or whether they release close together. But anyway, those are my main thoughts. I just want to kind of wrap up with the FFF talk and the Fluid talk again about like this idea of tension. I love Wooba. I think they're a great dev team. I think their decision to do what they've done with Fluids was the right one, given the situation they were in. Like, I am not saying they made a bad choice. I'm not saying they made a bad decision. I'm not saying the new system is bad. I also, in addition to all the things I just said, don't really like the new system. I want a better one, and I would love for them to revisit the Fluid system and make it better at some point in the future. And those two things coexist happily. And yeah, I'd love to know your thoughts on Fluids and all the stuff they kind of revealed about the space age development. So come on over to the Discord and chat about it, and we'll have fun there. If you'd like to support the podcast, head over to patreon.com/Krydax, or you can support directly via a link in the About section. Next week, I plan to stream the podcast on Twitch at the standard time, which is 11 a.m. Eastern or 3 p.m. UTC. And I will ping the Discord if there are any changes to that. And I would love to hear what you guys have to think. If you have any thoughts, if you have any questions, I love Q&A, and I'd like to kind of continually build up some question and answer to do. Ideally, I'd like to get to a point where there's enough questions rolling in where I can do a question every week to have a viewer question. So I think that would be cool, but I need you guys to ask questions. So please post a question on the YouTube VOD or on my Discord in the Factory Must Grow channel, and I will start compiling those into a list. So please ask me anything. It can be about Factorio stuff. It can be about factory gaming stuff. It can be about completely random life stuff. Like, what's my favorite, I don't even know. What's my favorite Marvel character? I was about to say it's blank, but now that I'm thinking about it, I actually don't know what it is. So that would require further thought. But yeah, let me know what you guys' questions are. Head over to the Discord and hang out. And as always, thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next week, where we will get to talk about the Space Age juicy release date. And always remember, the factory must grow.